It's 1:24 in the morning. Two police officers ring the buzzer of a museum in Boston. The guard on duty is 23 years old. He plays in a band, he's been drinking earlier that night, and he is not supposed to open that door for anyone. He opens it. 81 minutes later, 13 works of art are gone. A Vermeer, one of only 34 known to exist on the planet. 3 Rembrandts, 5 works by Degas. Nothing has ever been recovered. The empty frames are still hanging on the walls today, 36 years later. That's not neglect. There is a very specific reason those frames were never taken down, and it has nothing to do with hope. But before we get to that, you need to understand what actually happened in those 81 minutes, because almost nothing about this robbery makes sense. Boston, March 17th, 1990, St. Patrick's Day. In a city with this many Irish bars, that means the streets are still full at midnight. Police are stretched thin. Drunk people are everywhere, and 2 more men in uniform on a quiet side street are the least interesting thing happening in Boston. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum sits in the Fenway neighborhood, a Venetian palace transplanted into New England. Isabella Gardner was one of the great American collectors, an heiress who spent decades buying European masterpieces and arranged every single one of them herself, personally, room by room. She built the museum around her own taste and opened it to the public in 1903. At night, the building is protected by 2 guards, a set of motion detectors, and 1 panic button behind the security desk. That's it. No armed security, no exterior cameras covering the side entrance. The museum has money problems, and it has had them for years. Rick Abath is working the overnight shift. Around 12:50 a.m., he does something the investigators will still be arguing about decades later. He opens the museum's side door, briefly, and closes it again. He'll say he was checking that it was locked. Others will say that's a signal. Then, at 1:24, the buzzer. 2 men in Boston police uniforms are standing at the Palace Road entrance. One of them has a mustache that later turns out to be fake. They say they've received a report of a disturbance inside. Abath buzzes them in. That alone breaks the museum's rules. Guards are not supposed to admit anyone overnight, police included, without calling it in first. The officers step inside and start talking to him. And then one of them says something odd. He says Abath looks familiar. He says there might be a warrant out for him. He asks him to step away from the desk and come over to the wall, and Abath does. He walks away from the desk, away from the only panic button in the building. That's the entire heist, right there. Everything after this is just carrying things out the door. They cuff him. They call the second guard, Randy Heston, down from his rounds and cuff him too. They walk both men into the basement, handcuff them to pipes far apart from each other, and wrap duct tape around their heads and eyes. One of the thieves says something to Abath as he's being taped up. He tells him not to worry. He says something like, "Don't worry, they'll be hearing from us." Then they go upstairs and start destroying things. And this is where the story turns strange, because these 2 men do not behave like people who know anything about art. They go to the Dutch room on the 2nd floor. Hanging there is Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, the only seascape Rembrandt ever painted. There is only one. It is irreplaceable in the most literal sense of that word. They don't lift it off the wall. They pull the frame down, put it on the floor, and cut the canvas out of it with a blade. Then they do the same to a lady and gentleman in black. Anyone who has ever handled a 350-year-old painting will tell you what this means. Cutting a canvas out of its stretcher damages it. It leaves the edges shredded. It reduces the value of the work, sometimes enormously. Real art thieves, the professionals, the ones who steal to order, don't do this. They also take a Rembrandt self-portrait, etching about the size of a postage stamp. They take a landscape hanging nearby that everyone at the time believed was a Rembrandt, and which turned out to be by his student Govert Flink. Then they go to the short gallery and take 5 works by Degas. Sketches, mostly. Studies, not his famous pieces. And then they do something nobody has ever explained. They take a Chinese bronze beaker, a gu from the Shang dynasty, a small ceremonial vessel, thousands of years old, but not remotely the most valuable object in the room, and they try to steal a flag, a silk banner from Napoleon's Imperial Guard mounted on the wall. They can't get it down, it's screwed into the frame, so they give up and unscrew the eagle finial from the top of the flagpole and take that instead. A decorative metal bird. 2 men are inside a museum full of masterpieces with no time pressure, no alarm going off, and they spend part of their 81 minutes wrestling with a flagpole. Meanwhile, 1 floor up, hanging in the Titian room, is Titian's The Rape of Europa. It is generally considered the single most valuable object in the entire collection, arguably the most important Renaissance painting in North America. They never touch it. They never even go up there. Downstairs, in the Blue Room, they take Manet's Che Tortoni off the wall, and this is the detail that has poisoned this case for 3 decades. The museum's motion detectors logged movement throughout the building all night. Investigators later used that data to reconstruct exactly where the thieves walked, room by room, minute by minute. The sensors in the Blue Room never recorded either thief entering it. The only footsteps the system recorded in that room that night belonged to Rick Abath on his rounds, earlier in the evening. The Manet was taken. Somebody was in that room, and according to the building's own sensors, the only person who was ever in there was the guard. At 2:45 a.m., the thieves leave. They make 2 trips to a car parked outside. On their way out, they take the security videotape and the printouts from the motion detector system. They are careful about that, at least. At 8:15 in the morning, the day security manager arrives, finds the front door unlocked, and finds his 2 colleagues taped to pipes in the basement. The FBI arrives within hours, and then, essentially, the case stops moving for 23 years. Everyone in Boston has a theory. The city in 1990 is a place where organized crime is deeply woven into everything. This is Whitey Bulger's Boston, and the line between criminals and the people investigating them is not always a clean one. The names that come up over and over all belong to the same New England criminal world. Bobby Donati, a local mobster who had reportedly cased the museum and who, some believe, planned to trade the paintings for a friend's release from prison. Donati was murdered in September 1991, about 18 months after the robbery. George Reisfelder and Lenny DiMuzio, 2 men connected to a garage in Dorchester, run by a mobster named Carmelo Molino. Both of them died in 1991 as well. Notice the pattern. Nearly everyone seriously suspected of being inside that museum was dead within 2 years. In 2013, the FBI held a press conference and said something remarkable. They said they knew who did it. They said they had identified the thieves with a high degree of confidence, and that the men belonged to a criminal organization based in New England and the Mid-Atlantic states. They did not release the names. They said the men were dead. They also said the artwork had been moved, through Connecticut, then to Philadelphia, where it was reportedly offered for sale around 2003. After that, the trail simply stops. The last living person of real interest was a Connecticut mobster named Robert Gentile. Federal agents dug up his backyard. They found a handwritten list in his basement of the stolen works with prices next to them. Gentile denied everything until he died in 2021. Rick Abath, the guard who opened the door, spent the rest of his life insisting he had nothing to do with it. He was never charged. He died in 2024, and whatever he knew went with him, which leaves the obvious question. 13 masterpieces, worth over $500 million. Where are they? Here's the thing about stealing a Vermeer. You can't sell it. There are around 34 Vermeers in existence, and every serious buyer, dealer, auction house, and museum on Earth knows where every one of them is. The moment a stolen masterpiece surfaces in any legitimate market, it's identified instantly. It has no buyers. It has no price. Its enormous value exists only as long as it stays in public view, and the act of stealing it destroys that value completely. So what actually happens to paintings like these is that they get used as chips, underworld collateral, something you offer to a prosecutor when you're facing 30 years, or hand to another crew as security on a debt. They get moved, hidden, stored badly, and sometimes destroyed by people who panic. The men who cut those canvases out of their frames stole objects they could never convert into money. They took a metal eagle off a flagpole and left the most valuable painting in the building hanging on the wall upstairs. The statute of limitations on the theft itself expired long ago. The museum's reward is now $10 million. Federal prosecutors have publicly offered immunity to anyone who returns the works. You can right now legally hand back $500 million in stolen art and walk away with a check. Nobody has. Which brings us back to the frames. When Isabella Gardner died in 1924, her will left the museum to the public with one absolute condition. The collection was to remain exactly as she arranged it. Nothing added, nothing moved, nothing rearranged, ever. If the trustees violated that, the entire collection was to be sold and the proceeds given to Harvard. So the empty frames aren't a memorial, and they aren't a publicity strategy. They are a legal requirement. The museum literally cannot take them down. And that's what makes this case sit differently from very other art heist. Walk into the Dutch room today and you're not looking at a gap in a wall. You're looking at the exact spot, at the exact height, in the exact frame, where a Rembrandt hung for 87 years and then didn't. The next time you hear that a museum has been robbed, and it happens more often than most people realize, the question worth asking isn't how much the art was worth, it's who was standing at the door and why they opened it. Almost every major museum theft in the last century comes down to the same thing. Not sophisticated technology, not lasers, not acrobatics. A person, a rule that was supposed to be followed, and one moment where it wasn't. Somewhere out there, those 13 works are either sitting in a room or they no longer exist. And the strangest part is that the people who took them almost certainly never got paid.